Hello, my name is Joy Levin, and I am an early childhood educator at the Center for Creative Education, as well as doing a doctorate with UWC. My presentation is a Vygotskian analysis of a Waldorf kindergarten looking at the mediation of storytelling and play. So why Waldorf? I had been a Waldorf teacher for 10 years in the kindergarten. I was working in a rural area of the Eastern Cape in a Waldorf-based school. I was watching the Xhosa children play and listen to stories. I could hear how the language of the storytelling was coming into their play. I was telling stories in English and my assistant in Xhosa, and the teacher was amazed at the self-regulation of the children during play. I also saw how beneficial it was for the children that they could engage in crafts and activities where they actually made their own toys, in this case, horse reins. The sewing also helped them focus and hand-eye coordination. And this was my little classroom, with a beautiful imitation area, a round house, and lots of space to play with pieces of nature as toys. At the time, I was reading Vygotsky, and I could see how his theories of imagination and self-regulation fit the study. Vygotsky at the turn of the century was in classrooms where mixed cultures were colliding. He saw that each culture had their own way of thinking and acting, but what was common was the use of these mediating tools, for example, language, symbols, toys, and objects, in the internalization of language. He saw development as a gradual transition from the interindividual or social to the individual. A tool becomes a mediator of this process. He himself used the example of a stick, which for a child can become a horse and comes with a gesture and a language. Then they can use the toy and be able to say horse. Later they could draw a picture and horse, and even later have the concept in their mind. This is what he saw was the progression towards higher thinking capacities. Vygotsky found play very important, in fact, the age-appropriate activity for the preschool child until 7. But it wasn't any kind of play. He was defining according to these 3 factors: that children create imaginary situations, that they take on roles and act them out, and that these roles follow a set of rules determined by the game. So in terms of social cultural aspects of play and self-regulation, children engage in a form of self-talk or private speech, which is seen as a form of internalizing the social language. When mediating tools are less defined, for instance, a block becomes a phone, not a plastic phone, there is more language exchange to express themselves. Children are entirely in their imagination playing the roles, and this focus actually helps them to develop self-regulation. All play contains rules which emerge from the games. People think of play as free, but in fact it is bound by rules which the children follow, and learning the rules exists in socialization. This also contributes towards self-regulation. Tuff, in a New York Times article in 2009, was commenting that primary teachers were saying that there was a lack of self-regulation in the classrooms, and possibly that was due to a lack of play in their early childhood. They were asking, is our over-academic preschool education setting them up for a lack of self-regulation? So the concept of self-regulation has progressed quite a lot since the time of Vygotsky. It involves internal processes which help individuals to guide their goal-directed activities over time and contexts. Vygotsky considered the make-believe play of preschoolers to be the way that they overcome impulsiveness of their toddler time to develop the intentional behavior essential to higher mental functions. As well, self-regulation involves learning how to handle emotional situations such as sharing, transitions, and empathy for others. So I was working on my doctorate, and researched in my own Waldorf kindergarten class in 2016. I did a one-year study, which was ethnographic in methodology, looking at conversation or discourse analysis of the children with an observation journal. I also did document analysis, including the drawings, watching what kind of play they engage in, as well as their use of language. Knowing what stories I provided as a teacher, I was seeing if there was a relationship between the stories told and their play, and looking for signs of internalization. Now, here is an example of a Waldorf classroom. There is lots of room for movement. The whole class becomes available for play. There is an imitation area for children to act out all the aspects of the home. The toys are simple, mostly pieces of nature, such as pine cones and shells and stones, as well as table puppets of animals and humans, which can make these elaborate gardens on cloths. There is also a dress-up area. Imitation is very important in the Waldorf classroom. Where Vygotsky spoke of internalization of language becoming the means of developing cognitive capacities and personal psychology, it could also be said that children internalize their surroundings through imitation. Storytelling also has a particular way in the Waldorf school. There is a priority focus of fairy tales, which are journeys of innocence to maturity. Also, nature stories and local folk tales are used. It's important that the stories are rich in language and have happy endings for the children's faith in the world. It starts with a verse or a song, lighting a candle, and then the teacher tells orally the story. The teacher memorizes that word for word, repeats it at least 3 to 5 days, and then follows with days of puppetry or acting. With puppetry, it's told on a table. Small standing animals and humans of puppets. Colored cloths make landscapes and pieces of nature, and they tell the puppets as they moved with great care to their gesture. Here's an example of how cloths and simple toys and pieces of nature can become a landscape. Now, these toys are also available to the children, so they can start making puppet shows of their own. You can see when they play alone, there is a lot of this self-talk or private speech. This is also a class where an older child is presenting a puppet show to the whole rest of the class, and the class has put together signs and created the event of the puppet show, so that not only is she imitating language, but also the role of the teacher. Acting in the classroom is not a performance, but an experience. It's done at storytelling time. The room is set up with cloths, simple costumes and accessories, and the teacher tells the story while the children move the parts. And they shift the role every day so that sometimes they may have a minor role like a tree, and at other times a major role in the story. And we try and include all the children in the acting. I was then looking whether the stories that we acted were mediating their own play and imagination, and how those roles were modeled. Because children have the full hour and a half in the morning to play, it gives them lots of time. Here's an example of an elaborate garden in my own class that the children are making to create stories. And that it's not gender specific, this kind of play. Here's another where they're each taking characters and playing them and so focused in their story. So what were my conclusions? That repetitive telling of stories allow children to internalize the language, which then becomes their own when they're playing. Playing includes dressing up imaginary games which the stories feed their characters. Also making puppet shows and acting out characters. That teachers must remember that children are imitating everything that they do, not only the language. The affective realm of the stories helps the children to work through their own obstacles in an imaginative way. Teachers almost need to relearn how to provide free imaginative play for children, not only teacher-directed play, which does not allow for their own free will. And children have rules in play which allow them to find themselves within both freedom and constriction, and this emerges naturally from the play.